Hello. I am planning on sharing this week my experience during my employment at Creative Circle, which is a staffing firm focusing specifically on both marketing and advertising roles. And it could be both full-time or freelance placements on a national level. So, as someone who experienced both the training from a new employee standpoint, as well as one who was moved into a role where I actually led the training sessions, um, there were two major influences that really stood out for me during my time with Creative Circle. They would be the explicit knowledge transfer as well as knowledge management alignment. The explicit knowledge one, hopping into that one first, it really refers to knowledge that's super well documented, super articulated, and can easily be transferred from person to person. And Creative Circle was a really good example of explicit knowledge. Their training platform was designed in a way where new employees would be brought to Chicago and attend a week-long classroom style training session where we would go over softwares, role plays. A lot of memorization was utilized here, and as well as reciting specific lines about Creative Circle, such as Creative Circle is a marketing and staffing firm with a specialized focus on full-time and freelance placements. I can go into the memorization right there. Um, so there's a big emphasis on uh, memorization, not only from a softwares and systems standpoint, but also when you're communicating with clients and candidates, what terminology is going to be impactful for them, how we would talk through compensation, negotiation, and offer placement. Um, Other areas that were taught to us from a knowledge transfer standpoint would include how we overcome objections, how to utilize your past industry experience, really even down to specific phrases used at specific times to move the needle from a maybe to a yes, let's do it Greg's way. Uh, from a knowledge management alignment standpoint, which really refers to how we enhance the company's performance based on like documentations and tools and systems and structures, and what infrastructure is really set up to enhance the company's goals and create a culture focused on knowledge sharing. Uh, that was also a mainstay during the training experience with Creative Circle. That alignment stemmed from when we think about tools down to the software that we would use at Creative Circle. It's called an applicant tracking software, or ATS for short. Examples would include UKG or Workday as some big players in this arena. Well, Creative Circle's founder had actually designed his own software, and while the software itself was old and rudimentary, because of that, it allowed you to really move super fast because it didn't require a lot of fancy load times. Uh, it also really focused on everything dedicated to the staffing model. So, how can we open roles as fast as possible? How can we close roles as fast as possible? How can we create uniform candidate profiles, upload compensation requirements, upload tags and keywords so that we can find people faster to get them in front of potential employers faster? Oftentimes, you would spend 90+% of your day within this software system. And so that was a really massive tool that we were all trained on in person in Chicago. From a process and system standpoint, staff were measured on daily, weekly, and monthly goals, all focused on maintaining certain levels of activity. Metrics such as interviewing 10 people per week, working on all your jobs each day was mandatory. Meeting monthly full-time slash direct hire placements. Those were all majorly influenced by the type of culture that began with day one in the training session about meeting certain objectable measures each and every day. Um, that culture was constantly reinforced both at the beginning of every day after training when you would meet with your team to review new candidates that you had just met with, as well as at the end of the day when you would sit with your account executive, sales account executive partner to review progress made in the last 8 hours. And while this training and regular approach to to work may have proven effective for the business strategy, which I'll hop into a little bit, really centered around financial growth and somewhat ego driven through rewards, um, all stemming based on the company's growth strategy of more money the better. It also would lead to deep employee burnout and higher degrees of attrition stemming right out of the training period. Very quickly, you were quote unquote thrown to the wolves, and your onboarding was very minimal after training. It was, you will start working jobs from day one. And this is really, didn't matter if you were a recruiter or a salesperson. Um, but as such, employee burnout was a very real thing. I can remember, speaking candidly, people crying at their desk because of the pressure stemming down from leadership about hitting certain performance related metrics. And that would play a large part in introducing anxiety and depression. And when we consider the performance appraisal process that was done at the end of every quarter, naturally, dread was a major factor for most people leading up to that moment. Now, conversely, for those that embrace the culture such as this, there was no concern. But there were certainly elements in which people felt that pressure from above, and it unfortunately would lead to some of the negative aspects of the staffing model. When I think about personal traits, reviewing my personal traits that would lead to those previous outcomes here, um, one thing that really stands out to me that I've embraced about myself is I prefer to work in a learning organizational style environment where knowledge sharing is a big part of it. A culture of lifetime learning, as defined by No in this week's readings. That's a value of mine I really hold close, and I just have realized it the further along I've gotten in my career. Creative Circle's training emphasis on individual performance each and every day, whether you're a recruiter or a sales account executive, never really emphasized a culture of learning. It emphasized a culture of putting people into roles. So less critical thinking, skill development, and knowledge sharing, more about repetition and speed with the goal of financial gain, doing whatever it takes to get that done. And again, while that was maybe a motivating factor for me at one point in my career at Creative Circle, I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't going to be something sustainable for me long term, because money just hasn't played that level of role for me in my own growth and development. From a positive standpoint, though, I really understood that it was very clear what was expected from employees from day one. So I thought there was a really strong psychological contract in place. You come to Creative Circle if you want to make a lot of money and move fast as hell. It's that simple. And the company reinforced that and said, we will give you opportunities each day. So that understanding between the employer and the employee oftentimes is a very rare thing to have put to you so clearly. So it's almost a credit to Creative Circle for being very honest in saying, here's what we expect and here's what we can give you. And when an employer and an employee agree to that, that's that contract or agreement coming into place there, that psychological contract. And to their credit, Creative Circle never wavered from that. Arguably, I did. When I think about those company values versus my personal values, it's really hard to discern whether that's a positive or negative experience. Obviously, for me, it was something that I was not going to be there for a long time. I eventually switched and moved into executive search before transitioning to corporate executive search. But the company's business strategy, being well liked and well linked rather, was quite simple. It was and well executed. It began from day one. Who is Creative Circle and what do we do? So that initial onboarding and training phase was very clear. Through job documentation, through job approaches and methodologies, all the way through the performance, the performance review process, there was no mystery as to what Creative Circle was operating its employees. If you would embrace the strategy and successfully perform your job, you were building the type of culture the company wanted. If you didn't, this was not going to be the right fit for you, and the company was very okay with that. And because, of course, that would unfortunately it would lead to burnout and attrition, but it also emphasized the type of people who the company preferred to have regardless. And they were in fact then well seen by leadership. So again, while Creative Circle wasn't the long-term fit for me, there's an honesty in the approach to their relationship and their company values I do find refreshing. And acknowledging that it's not the right fit for me is certainly an okay thing to do.